very joyful spirit. So I just want to say thank you for actually enjoying this stuff, because it makes me happy, and I think you can feel it. So, congratulations. You've been promoting and talking about this film for about 3 months now. And I'd love to know, what has been the most surprising or unexpected reaction that you have gleaned from audiences? Something that maybe you didn't anticipate.
I love how different the moments are when people laugh from screening to screening. Like, people find laughter. It's just been an interesting lesson in what collective laughter is, because literally people respond collectively differently.
So they think like, oh, that person next to me is laughing. I'm gonna laugh too. Okay.
And or it's like gives people permission to, and if no one has the courage to have that first laugh in a movie where maybe you're not sure if you have permission to laugh, then the laugh doesn't happen. So it's just been really interesting watching that. And then also I think just the way people have been mapping what is important to them onto the film, so that the film seems to have this conversation with issues other than sexual assault. And people are bringing their struggles, or sometimes their communities' conversations, into the conversation around the film. So that was unexpected and really exciting to get to be part of those conversations.
And what have you heard from men about this film?
I find actually the most emotional responses I've had, and some of the most interesting conversations I've had have been with young men. So men, I mean, it varies. I mean, it's all about human beings and who they are, not necessarily gender and age, but I've been really excited by the conversations I've been able to have with men under 30 who have seen it and maybe didn't expect to respond to it, or didn't expect to see themselves in it or something for them. And I found that really hopeful, because I don't think that's what any of us maybe thought was going to happen.
I love that. It's so wonderful. And I'm so excited to be here, because I spoke to you a few weeks ago and I had like 100 other questions that we didn't get to. So this is a wonderful opportunity for me to ask, and the first of which I cannot not ask: why Daydream Believer? Any song in the entire universe. It's so funny and so strange and just so perfect. So please tell me why.
Sure, it was trial and error. So originally it was California Dreaming, which is what Miriam Tates wrote in the book of Women Talking. It was California Dreaming. And I was very attached to it. It was very expensive. And
it's always the case, yeah.
Then we had another song. I think we were using Chicago by Sufjan Stevens for a while. And I had like Ben Whishaw sing along with both of those things on camera. And then we just wanted to play with it, because we felt like both those songs expressed a longing that was too right for what was happening in the story, and that there should be something both incongruous and indifferent to what was happening in the film, but also an opportunity to have one of those moments of joy that you have when there's a needle drop in a movie of a song you like. So I think it was just like an idea of opening up permission to feel whatever we wanted to feel at that moment. So I think we tried a million songs, and one day Chris Donaldson, my editor, just like looked at me very nervously and was like, I'm just gonna play this for you, and all the assistants were like, this is so it was like, it had been decided before I entered the editing room. That's what was happening.
Well, there's such a wonderful naivete to that song, and when it came out, and there was such a teeny bopper vibe that it's just so perfect, so well done. So I'm so glad I got a chance to ask that, because it's been a burning question for the last 2 weeks. So you mentioned Miriam's incredible novel. And one of the biggest structural changes that you made was shifting the narrator. So I'd love for you to talk about that process, which I know came a little bit later on. So tell us about who it is in the book and who it ended up being.
So in the book, it's narrated by August, and what we're reading is his minutes of the meeting, and that's the voice through which you hear the whole story. And it works beautifully in the book. It's so unexpected and strange choice, and his voice is so interesting, the way he's interpreting what they're saying. And I assumed that's what the spine of the film would be, and I wrote it that way. We recorded Ben doing the voiceover, and then pretty deep into the editing process, we realized there was a disconnect between how we were feeling and how we were supposed to feel, and we thought maybe that has to do with the distance created by not having the story told through someone who's directly experienced the violence. And then we got really captivated by Kate Hallett's performance, which we were always trying to center more but couldn't quite figure out how to. And just the idea of hope, and that you can already just even subconsciously hear that something's being told to you from a different place to someone who's been born. Like, even if you don't kind of get it every moment what you're listening to, that there's some sense that it's from a possible future.
And of course, she's telling the story to Ona's unborn child, which makes it that much more beautiful. And of course, we end on a gorgeous baby, and the harbinger of hope that the film is just, we all need it at that point. I would say so. I'd like to talk about the cinematography, which is something we didn't get a chance to talk about last time, working with your DP Luke, with whom you worked on other films. What were the conversations you had with him early on about how to frame these characters, knowing the sort of insulated environment in which you're telling the story? And it actually feels very large. The story doesn't feel small. So tell me how you accomplished that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a world in which you could make this as a very claustrophobic chamber piece that never leaves the barn, in a very small space, with a lot of close-ups. And my sense was you're telling a story about community. You're telling a story about women who are taking apart and then rebuilding an entire world. The stakes sort of couldn't be higher. So I was always intrigued by the idea of it feeling epic and expansive and breathing, so that even in the hayloft, it's very hard to isolate anybody. Like, we shot in 276, and it's very hard to isolate people, so that even a close-up becomes a close-up of 2 or 3 people. And when we do isolate people, it's very, very intentional and specific. So I was interested in that within the hayloft, and then outside of the hayloft, I just wanted to get this sense of like an entire, giant, huge scope of a world that's being discussed and debated, and in that very act being changed.
I love that. And it makes me think of one of my favorite quotes from this incredible New Yorker profile. If you haven't read it, it's from the last couple issues, just spectacular storytelling, where you mention, this is not a comparison I thought I would ever read you, but you said that you grew up watching Oliver Stone movies. And you said, for Oliver Stone movie, a football game feels like the biggest epic event in the world. So you apply that same ethos to this, and this event is the biggest event in the world. And I love that comparison. It's up to the filmmaker to tell us how important it is what we're seeing, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I always felt offended by that approach, to be honest with you. I'd always be like, oh my God, like there's
It's
a lot of other things happening. And nobody cares about any of our stories, really, because there's so many of them happening at the same time. And so I think in my previous films, I've always actively kept in mind, resist the temptation to be self-centered about your story. Like, always have an indication that something goes by that doesn't care, which maybe in this case is Daydream Believer in the Census Truck. But I didn't want to be shy in this film about being a little bit bombastic and using a camera really in a muscular, intentional way, because I think it's very easy in a story like this to either minimize or make small a story about a conversation. But when a conversation has this big an impact, and the exercise of a true democracy is so important, I kind of wanted to use an almost old-fashioned, classical, formal,
Like a 12 Angry Men approach.
Almost, yeah, or almost like an epic or a western, or like a story about something.
A story about men.
Yeah, story about men.
I think I'm reading you. I love that, and I read so much about the production experience you had, and you had early mandates to make sure that the following took place: that no one's domestic life would be disturbed, that everyone felt safe and cared for on set. You even had a therapist on set. And that people always felt welcome to share, and again, safety being the number one concern. And this, I already know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Why are these tenets of a production so rare? Because clearly you executed it. You had a vision and you stuck to it. And are we just so used to having to suffer to make art that we can't possibly just prioritize our own happiness when we're making these movies?
Well, I think first of all, the industry was built by people who didn't have caregiving responsibilities. So,
Hello.
Yeah, so all of the rules and infrastructure around it are people who weren't responsible for taking care of their elderly parent, or nursing a friend through surgery, or taking care of children,
or breastfeeding on set.
Any of those things. So I think that it's just developed around this idea of somebody who has no responsibilities, complete freedom, and be totally single focused, which even if you don't have children is not a healthy way to live. Like, we all, if we're decent people, have responsibilities to people.
I mean, at least people have dogs to walk at home.
Yeah,
very
So I I have always been deeply interested in what a film set would look like if it captured those things, and always pretty sure that it was not going to diminish the work to do so, that actually people would be more invested and more committed to working and to finding solutions and being creative and have that room if they felt like there wasn't this white noise of having abandoned their lives. So both for me personally and also just in terms of being responsible for the dynamic and community of people, we did our very best. And again, I think you can't be perfect about these things, but I think the intention is to try your hardest, learn where you fell down, and do it better next time.
And how long was the shoot in total?
I think we had 38 days.
It's not long.
It's not long, but for a movie like this, it was way more than that's what I hoped we would get. And we were given by MGM what we needed to make this film. Like, we weren't making huge compromises all the time. We had to make some, but it was a really amazing environment in which to get to make this film. They really got behind us.
And it shows. It really does. You said something recently. You said so many interesting things recently, so it's hard to choose. But one of which is, quote, I've always been drawn to the collectivity and selflessness of these communities that we see on the screen. And that you weren't interested in judging the way these women practiced or experienced their faith. Because I think there is an opportunity to judge watching this story. And it made me wonder, do you think a story like this could be told about a secular community and have the same impact? How much of the religion piece do you think influences the way we perceive the story?
I think there are versions of this story everywhere. Certainly, I think there are obvious echoes in our current society. I think any place where there's patriarchy, what they talk about is relevant. But I was really interested in the fact that they had their faith as an anchor to help guide them forward. So whether that be a faith or a value system, I think it can be mapped onto a secular life as well. But I think it has this quality, Miriam's book, of a myth, and I think part of that is they know what they believe and they know what they'd like to see because they have this incredibly deep understanding of this religious text. And so I think that they're become deeply critical of the hierarchical structures that have sprung up around their faith. But the faith itself, I wanted to meet those women on their own terms in terms of their relationship to it and what they were fighting for and what they saw as good in it. Because I think it's very easy as a secular person to step back and just conflate the structures around religion with faith itself and not look at the nuance of that.
So true, and it's so personal. I think that's really what I take away. Last year I talked to Maggie Gyllenhaal about her directorial debut, and she, like you, although not as young as you, started acting as a young person. And she said she always felt like what she called a directorial actor, that she was sort of a director coming into her own, but through the experience of acting. And it made me wonder, when you first felt like a director, even before you necessarily made a film, did you feel like a director before that?
No, I would say I didn't. That's so interesting. I feel like I don't talk to her about that. Very interesting person. So I think that I was acting until I think my first short film I made when I was 19, and I really did it because I had the idea for a short film, not because I'd ever considered directing. And I just
really the story that drove.
Yeah, I just had something I wanted to express, and I got some friends to help out, and it was through the process of doing it that I really realized I loved it and wanted to do it, but I never imagined doing it, and it was terrible, and I did a horrible job, and I didn't care. I was like, I love this so much, it's embarrassing.
That's why you get the short, it's to experiment, right? So with the films you've made away from her, these are all amazing if you haven't had a chance to see, Take This Waltz, the stories we tell, and of course, When Talking. Do you see a thread among these films? Is there connective tissue that you can say feels on brand for you, in quotation marks?
I think it's hard, because you're sort of looking at yourself, so I don't know if I have the best perspective on it. I'm really deeply interested in memory and of different versions of the same story. I think more and more as I get older, I become more and more interested in the idea of a chorus of voices instead of a single perspective. So what the same set of events looks like to many people. And I think I started to play with that in Stories We Tell, and then
Rashomon.
Yeah.
Right. It's really interesting. So the book, which some of you will have the pleasure of having her sign after this, incredible book, my favorite book of the year, Run Towards the Danger, a memoir. You specifically name and identify people and systems in your life who have hurt you over the years, whether as a child or as an adult. And it made me wonder if you have been able to reach a place of forgiveness for those people and systems who have hurt you.
That's such a good question.
Thank you, sir.
I would say, I think it's really important to stay hard on systems and see what you can find to be kind about in individuals. I do feel like I don't harbor and carry with me a lot of anger anymore about the things that have happened to me, but I do carry a strong urgency that the systems that enable those people to create unsafe conditions for others or be abusive and who were never accountable, that those systems be changed. And I feel like I want to put all of my energy into that instead of the idea of individual culpability. Because yes, it would be wonderful to get an apology, and yes, it would be wonderful for them to be accountable, but they were a product of a world that didn't just enable but encouraged it. And so I guess in a way I do feel a certain level of forgiveness, but like a lot has to change to make sure that that can't happen again.
Well, and per your earlier comment about the young men you've spoken to, and not to say we're not all responsible for changing these systems, but even just reaching young people and having that feeling spread, I think that must feel comforting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do have an enormous amount of hope, especially with, I'm a big fan of the Gen Z. I do feel like, I mean, it's like cliche to say at this point, but I do feel like, oh my God, like it's actually possible to be critical and smart and skeptical and incredibly well informed and just be looking for what the hell are we gonna do about this instead of sitting back in the role of the cynic. And that I'm super curious about. Like I'm just curious about, for me, I think the only off-ramp to being lost in grief and rage is a way forward in community.
I could sit and talk to you all day, but we don't have time for that. So I will wrap here and just say thank you so much and congratulations. And for those sticking around for the book signing, please hold tight.